Hello and welcome. This is another one of the deer and deer hunting webinars. Today we have a real special treat for you. We have Joe Shed, who's a regular deer and deer hunting contributor. We're going to be talking a little bit about shed hunting from the basics. And Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Joe Shed. That's my real name. And I'm really hooked on shed antler hunting. I just love to do it. I love to do it as much as I love to hunt deer. Got hooked on it about 10 years ago, I guess, and spent a lot of time every spring and winter looking for antlers. And it's kind of gotten to be my passion. I've written a book on it called Shed Hunting and produced a DVD on it called Go Shed Hunting with Joe Shed, and just kind of what I do in the springtime every year.
You also do shed hunting in the wintertime, or is that just a spring thing for you?
Yeah, I always used to just go mostly in the spring after the snow melts, but this year in particular I've gotten out looking a lot earlier. I spent a lot of time out in January and actually had pretty good success this year in January too.
Okay. So today Joe's going to talk about three main shed hunting topics. First off, what shed hunting is. Secondly, where to find them. And three, how to find them. Two very different things. And then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts about shed hunting. So to start off, Joe, what is shed hunting exactly?
Well, basically, shed hunting is just going out in the woods every year, late winter or early spring, and just looking for deer antlers. Bucks naturally shed their antlers every year, anytime from late November as late as early May, but generally the bucks are shedding from about December 15th to about March 15th.
Is that generally, you mean for the northern latitudes or the southern latitudes?
Yeah, this is for northern latitudes I'm talking about. My area here, I live in northern Wisconsin. But I guess like further south, the rut is pushed back about a month later than our rut here, so the setting process is about a month behind we are too.
Okay. So yeah, the popularity seems to have picked up along with you see people suffering from antler addiction. What's driving this demand or this interest behind the popularity of shed hunting?
Well, it's definitely been something that's really increased in popularity in probably about the last 10 years. And I think one of the driving factors in that is people are getting more into managing their land for deer and passing up bucks. The whole quality deer movement, quality deer management movement, where people are letting bucks go. So there's more bucks out there in the population to actually shed their antlers. And then just taking a more active role in land management and wanting to know about the deer on the property. So people are going out and looking for sheds. That's evidence that a deer has survived the deer season. So a lot more interest in the last few years.
Is there any financial gain behind finding a shed? Can you sell these things?
Absolutely. Markets, there's shed antler auctions. There's always sheds for sale on eBay. And it really brings some amazing numbers. Some of the higher quality, professional sized sheds can bring thousands of dollars.
Really?
Yeah. But and then there's always a market for just normal sized sheds too, for crafters, people making chandeliers or lamps or belt buckles or what have you. So there's a lot of interest right now in buying antlers too.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about where to shed hunt. On the property I'm at right now, I've got about 5 acres of coniferous wooded lot. At some point, what should I be looking on my little corner of the world? Where are some areas where I should look to shed hunt?
Well, it kind of depends. On only 5 acres, it's going to be a matter of whether there's any bucks actually wintering in that spot. But if it's coniferous forest here in Wisconsin, that's not a bad thing. It'll be a good bedding area. Those conifers will offer you some shelter from the wind, and they'll catch the snow up in the treetops rather than on the ground. So it's easier for deer to travel around there.
Okay. When you say that there's three main areas that I should be looking at, can you speak a little bit about each one of those areas?
Okay. Basically, the three areas where you're finding sheds are bedding areas, feeding areas, and the trails that connect the two. Bedding areas, as we just mentioned, coniferous forests are great, especially in the northern latitudes. What they do is they block the wind. They give the deer some shelter from the wind, and also the snow gets hung up in the treetops. So if you walk under pine trees, there'll actually be less snow there than out in the open fields. And the deer congregate in there, as a good place to bed. It makes it a little easier for them to travel, too, with less snow. But deer aren't always bedding in the thickest cover, particularly in the north here where it's snowy and cold. A lot of times, people don't really seem to realize this, but a lot of times they'll actually bed out in sunny areas. And what they're doing is they're bedding out where the sun is hitting them, just kind of like a cat sits in a windowsill, soaking up that heat, and the sun is melting the snow in those areas first. Like a good example is a south-facing hillside. If you've ever walked around a hill, the south side of the hill will always have a little snow in the winter than the north side, because the north side is in the shade. So the deer move over to the sunny side. The sun is there first. It makes it easier for them to travel and find food, and they like to soak up the heat, just like a cat in a windowsill.
Okay.
The next area we're talking about is feeding areas. Obviously, the deer are eating in the wintertime. It could be an agricultural field. It could be a cornfield, soybean field, alfalfa field, anything like that. Particularly if any of these fields are left unharvested, those can be real deer magnets in the wintertime. Might be food plots. Some of the late season food plots that deer might be still hitting clover, or they might be into something more like brassica or rape. Those can be good spots as well. And also natural browse. You go around in this area, there's a lot of deer eating the red osier dogwood. They're eating white cedars. It's a great winter food because it provides both bedding cover and food. A lot of deer actually eating aspen this time of year. When late winter here, when the food is really running out, they'll start eating aspen buds and even the bark off the aspen. So just kind of want to look around, see what the deer are eating, and actually the act of eating can sometimes knock an antler loose as well. And then the last area to look for would be the trails connecting bedding and feeding areas. You can spend a lifetime walking trails in the woods. There's trails crisscrossing everywhere. And some trails are better than others, and it's basically trial and error. A lot of times the biggest trails you see in the woods are trails that are being used by does and fawns, and not necessarily the bucks. Now, a big trail coming to hot food source will attract all deer, but a lot of times the bucks, especially mature bucks, will use their own trails off to the side and usually downwind of the other deer. So it can take a lot of walking and a lot of luck. And sometimes spots and trails are especially good to look for sheds, or any place the deer has to jump or jar its body and just can cause a shed to fall off, such as anytime a deer jumps over a fence or jumps over a creek or even a fallen log in the trail. So those are kind of the three main areas that I find most of my sheds in.
So on that trail, I should be looking for obstacles on that trail, or low-hanging branches, fences, something like that, right?
Yeah. A lot of times you'll just find them randomly laying on the trail, too. But anytime you can find a fence or a low-hanging branch or something like that, that kind of swings the odds in your favor.
Okay. And I guess one of the obvious things to look for is to find the bucks if you can find them. I imagine it involves a lot of scouting, though, year-round.
Yeah, absolutely. Shed hunting, is a lot like deer hunting. You're going out in the woods and trying to find these animals. You can do it, driving around, looking out in crop fields at night, or towards the evening time when the deer congregate out there, or just visually walking through the woods and observing deer. Scouting cameras too are a great way to figure out not only what bucks are around, but when the deer are shed. A lot of times people will have deer coming into a particular scouting camera frequently, and all of a sudden one day it shows up with a horn antler on its head. So you kind of get an idea for when that antler fell off and go after it after that.
Okay. That makes sense. So, say I'm walking out into an area that I'm really not familiar with, and I feel like going shed hunting. What are just on the spot good locations that I should be looking for?
Well, there's a few different things I like to look for. I mentioned earlier south-facing hillsides. That's where the sun melts first, and making it easy for the deer to feed and travel. And they also like to bed in those areas so they can soak up the sunlight. So that's a good spot to look. And being from the Midwest, our hills aren't exactly the Rocky Mountains here. I mean, any little hill, maybe it's just a few feet high. Sometimes even just a little ridge running through a swamp. Maybe just 5 feet higher than the rest of the surrounding areas. I mean, that's the terrain that the deer are relating to. So any little hill like that. Another place to look is a forest clearing, particularly at the edge of the clearing. Once again, if you have a forest clearing, I like to look on the south edge of the standing forest, right where that meets the clearing, because once again, that's creating that south-facing edge. And a lot of times deer will bed along those forest edges like that. Clearings as well often have a lot of new browse shooting up, and that's a good food source for deer. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
But not too big a clearings, right?
Well, it's large or small. I mean, a lot of times when you're in the big woods, when everything looks just the same, any kind of little opening is like an edge effect for deer. So if there's something different that stands out.
Okay. And also, lone evergreens too would be another area to look.
Yeah, lone evergreens are one of my favorite places to look for sheds. And that can be, it might just be a lone pine tree out in the middle of a fallow field, or it could be, just a few pines or cedars or whatever scattered among the hardwood forest. And what those do is, it's kind of an odd feature in the landscape. It's something that the deer can relate to. And if you go to a lone evergreen tree, more often than not, you're going to find a deer bed on it, and more often than not, it'll be on the south side of the tree. And what happens is the deer go out of their way. It's some structure for them to relate to. It's something they can, have their back against for, safety from predators. And the bed underneath those trees a lot. So that's the first thing I do is I go to pretty much every lone evergreen tree that I see.
Okay. As you mentioned before, coniferous forests are a great place to look too.
Yeah, they really are. They provide a lot of shelter from the elements in the winter for deer. They're blocking the wind and prevent the snow from hitting the ground, so it's just easier for deer to travel. So the deer are able to stay warm and move around better in coniferous forests.
Okay. And in clear cuts in transitional habitats, that kind of falls into the forest clearings.
Right, and especially a clear cut, a fresh clear cut from that winter, the deer will come in there. A lot of times they'll come in right next to the logging equipment, and they'll just start eating those treetops that they couldn't otherwise get at. And then, by the next year, the new growth is shooting up in the clear cut, and it's creating great browse. It's at deer level, so clear cuts are real good. Both the first year that they're logged, while it's being logged, as well as the fall. Because browse for deer to reach.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about where to shed hunt. So let's talk about how to find sheds. I'm walking through the woods. I might just kind of come up upon a shed laying on the ground that I almost kick with my feet, but it's probably not going to happen, is it?
So you really got to be looking for sheds, and that's one thing I've learned that, I've talked to a lot of people, and they might say, I've been walking in the woods all my life, and I've never found a shed. Well, you kind of have to be looking for them. Sometimes you just get lucky, but other times it takes a lot of patience and concentration. I've had, personally this year, I actually stepped over one shed and found it the next day, and had another one I walked within 3 feet of and found it later that afternoon, and it's just fleeting moment where I looked up. The one where I was 3 feet from it, I was looking up at some deer that were running and took that focus away from me, and I wasn't looking at the ground, and I was looking up in the air, and the shed was right there. So it really takes some focus and concentration. But and another thing you really need to do is learn to walk slowly. It's we're so busy in our lives, and we tend to walk pretty quickly. And when you get in the woods, you got to just kind of slow down. It's like still hunting almost. You really have to slow down and pick apart the landscape, for that thing you're looking for. When you're still hunting, you're looking for the live deer, and when you're shed hunting, you're looking for that, deer antler. And you really need to slow down your pace and concentrate on what you're doing. And
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And that last point, stay positive. If I'm out there for a week and I don't find a shed, I'm either doing something wrong or there just are no sheds, right?
Well, not necessarily. There's been a lot of times where I've been out with other guys and we've been walking and you get dejected, you haven't found anything for a while, and you start to think negative thoughts, and then you talk to somebody and your buddy picked the one up in a spot you were just at, and it's frustrating, and it makes you realize you're not keeping your head in the game. So you just got to stay positive. A lot of times there's competition from other shed hunters, and if I see boot tracks in the woods, it's depressing because somebody might have picked up those sheds in that spot. But I always just have to stay positive and remind myself, hey, buck could have dropped the shed 5 minutes ago, or these guys could have missed the shed. So you just got to stay positive, because if you start thinking negative thoughts, you're probably not going to find anything at all.
And that kind of relates to deer hunting in general. If you see other hunters in an area, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be unsuccessful.
Absolutely. There's a lot of parallels between shed hunting and deer hunting.
Right. All right. So as I'm walking slowly through the woods or clearing or wherever I am, there's some things that I should be training my eye to see, that I should see in my mind before I see them in the physical world. What are some of the things that I should be looking for with my eyes?
Well, sometimes sheds land tines up, and sometimes they land tines down. And I think they're a little easier to see when they're tines up, because those antler tips are projecting up in the air above the grass and the sticks and stuff. But a lot of times what you need to do is just look for a piece of antler. Sometimes when you're deer hunting, you might see a tail twitch, or you might see an ear flick or something like that before you see the whole deer. And that can be the same way with shed hunting. Look for pieces of antler, maybe a little antler tine sticking up out of the grass, or a lot of times if they're laying tines up, it'll be like kind of a W shape with the 3 tines parallel to each other, or if they're tines down, it'll look kind of like an M with those 3 parallel lines. Sometimes you'll see the round base projecting out. It'll kind of look like a golf ball sitting on the ground. So these are things you kind of train your brain to look for, and sometimes it's not even a bad idea to bring a shed along with you and just toss it out in the grass every once in a while and just kind of get your eyes used to seeing that shape of an antler on the ground.
Right, that's a great tip. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that I've noticed, and the area I shed on is big woods. I don't have wide open fields, so it's a little different in an agricultural area. But a lot of times the sheds that I find are nearly right underneath my feet. Your vision is best close into you. You can see a shed a lot easier from 10 feet than you can from 30 yards or something like that. So I'm concentrating on what's at my feet. That's where I can see best. And it doesn't pay for me to look way ahead, because I'm walking forward. I'm going to get there eventually anyway. So I just concentrate on what's real close to me. And even when I do that, a lot of times I'll be just about stepping on an antler before I even see it. So just got to really be keeping your eyes on the ground, paying attention, and then just looking close where you can see the best.
Well, and that takes a lot of discipline. I mean, just to keep your focus for that long on that small of a space. Is this something that people should practice at home maybe before they go? I mean, this is a real sport that we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's more than meets the eye. One thing I've noticed is I usually do best, and I've talked to other people who say the same thing. I usually do best if I'm out shed hunting for, say, a 2-3 hours instead of all day, because I think it's hard to maintain that focus, for 6 or 8 hours all day long. And usually by late afternoon, I'm just not finding anything. It's because I'm not focused like I was before.
Right, and so once I find 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 sheds in a day, what do you got to look for to see that you have a set? Not every rack is going to be typical.
Right. Sometimes it can be a problem. I have sheds in my collection that, I'll never know for sure if they're really a set. I think they are, but I'm not sure. A couple things to look for. A lot of times the bases are going to be the same shape. They might be round, they might be oval. Sometimes a shed will break a little funny off the skull of a deer. It might have a little ridge in the base of the antler. And I found sets where they have like identical ridges that they broke off the same way. Other things to look for is they're going to be the same color. They'll have the same texture below the burr or below the brow tine, that rough correlation and beating. A lot of times they look fairly typical. They look like mirror images of each other, but sometimes I've seen some pretty strange looking racks where if you didn't have scouting camera photos or something like that, you'd never know for sure it was the same buck. So there's always a little bit of a mystery involved.
Right. Well, I know one person who likes to shed hunt who says, when it's real close like that, just to make sure, maybe you want to weigh each shed to see if they're close or identical in weight. Is that a reliable test?
I've never heard of trying that. It could be reliable if they were, both 4-point sides. Obviously, if one had 5 points versus 4 points, they're obviously going to weigh different. But I've never heard of that. But.
Okay. Well, what other things that we maybe not cover about shed hunting that you feel are very important to the sport?
Well, I guess, like we talked about, some of the biggest things are just staying positive. I mean, don't expect to find success every time out. Personally this year I started off real well in January and early February, and right now it's been prime time, and I've struggled lately, and it's going to happen. It's like anything. Like a baseball player gets in a hitting slump, and same thing with shed hunting, but you just got to stay focused and be persistent. So it's something that took me a long time to get into and develop the skills for it. But the more you do it, the more you get a feel for how do you relate to the landscape, where bucks are likely to spend their time, and the more success you'll enjoy. And once you find that first shed, a lot of people just get hooked on it. Well,
do you feel this has made you a better deer hunter?
Oh, absolutely. I've learned so much from shed hunting. It forces you to really pay attention to the landscape and how deer are relating to their habitat. You won't find many sheds if you're not a student of deer movements, and it's helped my deer hunting tremendously. It's helped my patience and just all around in general knowledge of deer.
Okay. And just off the top of your head, how many sheds do you think you found up in your entire life?
Oh, it's in the hundreds. I don't really know how many, but it's a lot.
Oh, great. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm Ben Sobiak, online editor with Deer and Deer Hunting. And thanks.
Oh, thank you, Ben.